Here Spirit School, Chapter 6, entitled Run. James stood with his hand on his hips, looking triumphant. I knew we'd find it, he said. Oh, yeah, they said, hiding their amazement. By the time they got back to their rooms, they were all exhausted and slept soundly. The next day was a music lesson, and the teacher gave them all an instrument to play. James bashed away on the drums, and the girls practiced chords on the guitar with their soft fingers. It was painful on the fingers and painful to the teacher. They studied the lives of the great composers, Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, and they listened intently. It was fascinating. The teacher was a very old lady. She was small and fragile looking, but she was very enthusiastic. It was obvious that she loved music, as all music teachers should. She played some Chopin on the piano, and it was very beautiful. The girls were spellbound as the piece was romantic, and they both tried not to look at James, who was affecting indifference. Although he could play the guitar, he kept it to himself. He didn't want to be the center of attention, singing love songs in front of the girls. The teacher's name was Mary. She was Scottish, and it was rumored that in her past life she was an alcoholic, driven to drink and despair by a tragic love affair. Now she was teetotal and a lot happier. She finished off the lesson by furiously playing the violin. Her head was shaking and her hair was flying everywhere. It was comical. Even the girls found her playing impressive. It was hard not to laugh, and they hid their giggles behind their hands. It was a relief when the break came and they all sat together and chatted. Anna asked James why he didn't play the guitar when he had the chance. Oh, I didn't want to show off, he said. The girls laughed and chatted about pop music while James fell into a daydream. That night he lay on his bed and thought back to his life on Earth and how things had changed. He was quite close to his mum. The one consolation for him was that he had the girls for company and at least he didn't have to fear death. He felt quite lonely and wished he had a girlfriend. He liked both the girls equally and he hadn't decided which one he preferred or if he was willing to try. He wished he could ask his mum about it. The next day they sat together for breakfast and coffee. Lucy and Anna chatted away and James was silent as he was so tired. He found it hard to suppress a large yawn. Anna asked him if he was okay. Sure, he said, I had a bad night's sleep. Didn't, said Lucy, and she gave him a hug. He cheered up and tried not to blush. They had a lot of revision to do, so they spent the rest of the day in the library. A great place to relax in, he thought, apart from the terrifying librarian. They had English literature to study, so they buried their noses in their books. James was restless and had to wander around. He found it hard to concentrate on one thing at a time. He looked through the poetry books with interest. He had always loved poetry and wished he was a great poet like the World War One poets. But obviously he had no desire to die in battle. When he was reading the poem, he found himself in the trenches. In his mind, in the mud, he was in the mud, feeling the terror of the bombs and the machine guns. He had a vivid imagination and found it easy to get lost in it. It was just as he was coming out of his reverie that he felt someone standing behind him. He looked round, and to his shock, it was the librarian. He didn't scream or shout, as he was too frightened to make any noise. She looked very pale, and she had an anguished look in her eyes. She bent over him and grabbed the book and flung it violently at the wall. She smiled a thin, angry smile. He leapt up from the chair and to get away. She walked towards the bookshelves and then disappeared. The library was empty, so there were no witnesses, and he ran to the girls to tell them what had happened. They were amazed it had happened again. Anna was disappointed she hadn't been there. Did she scream? Said Lucy. No, he replied, but she was very angry. I feel quite sorry for her, said Anne. Me too, said Lucy. I don't think she means any harm. She's just in pain. I'd hate to be heartbroken like that, said Anne. Yes, I feel sorry for her, said Lucy. Well, I do too, said James. But she scared the hell out of me. They laughed. Should we tell anyone? Lucy said. No, Anne replied. It's better if we keep it to ourselves. They went for lunch away from the other pupils. They chatted about the exam that was coming tomorrow. James sounded cocky, but in reality they were all nervous. I was hoping there wouldn't be exams in the afterlife, said Anne dejectedly. So did I, said Lucy. I think it's their way of giving us some purpose. She added helpfully. It's not all bad, said James brightly. At least we don't have to work. Later that evening, they all tried to cram in some revision, and James lay on his bunk reading a poetry book. Like the World War One poets, he was a sensitive soul underneath, and although he hated war, he found their heroism and anti-war stance compelling and inspiring. After a while, he wondered how the girls were getting on, as none of them seemed super studious. He was drifting off to daydream land again when there was a knock on the door. It was Anne. Hi, she said, and sat on the edge of the bed. How's the poetry going? She was interested. It's okay, he said with a smile. She was dressed in a white tracksuit and looked hot. I'm looking forward to the exam, she said, just to get it over with. Me too. She sat close to him and glanced at the book as he gently turned the pages. To his surprise, she leaned closer and kissed him. He was shocked, but found himself kissing her back. It was a lovely soft kiss, and it lasted 5 minutes. And then they lay on the bed and cuddled. Well, said James, this has definitely perked me up for tomorrow. Me too, said Anne. Then he stroked her long black hair and felt a lovely warm glow inside. I'd love us to be a couple, he said excitedly. Me too, she replied. They kissed again and then spoke. We'll have to tell Lucy. Hope she doesn't mind. They carried on chatting and kissing until it got late, and then they kissed good night. The next day they sat in the exam room looking unusually happy. Lucy came in wearing a frown and sat behind James. James and Anne exchanged furtive glances as the paper was put before them. James concentrated hard. He had always found exams stressful and boring. They seemed to turn his mind to mush. He was so excited from the night before that it was impossible to concentrate. He looked round and saw the others scribbling away manically. He tried to kick into gear. Although he had revised a lot, most of it went out of the window when he looked at the paper. His mind was like a blank piece of paper. All the things he had read came back to him in the wrong order. He began to sweat and he could feel a headache begin to appear. He, he started scribbling furiously. If he didn't know the answer, then he'd guess. He was determined to fill up the paper no matter what. The hands of the clock seemed to speed up every time he looked. His only consolation was that he could be with Lucy when it was all over. It was a nightmare. He began to sweat as each question was harder than the one before. Who did what and when? He didn't care. What is a couple of this and that? He didn't care. He got so stressed that he felt like ripping the paper up and storming out. Eventually, he gathered his thoughts up enough to answer a few of the questions with some knowledge. He could see Lucy and Anna writing away with ease. He looked at the clock to see there was only 5 minutes to go. He answered the last few questions in a frenzy. Finally, the exam ended and they went for lunch. It was a disaster. James decided to tell Lucy over coffee that he was a bit worried that it may harm their friendship. In his mind, they were a team and he didn't want to break it up. He took Lucy to one side and told her. She didn't look happy, but she accepted the situation. Hope you're not too upset, he said. It's okay, she said. I thought you'd get together anyway, she replied with a laugh. You're not that attractive. James shrugged and they sat back. Anna was looking pleased and relieved. How did the exam go, he said. Great, said Anna. I remember nearly everything. Me too, said Lucy. James groaned inside. He was resigned to not doing well. It was just the same on earth. The only thing he had enthusiasm for was sport or strumming the guitar. He would love he would have loved to take an exam in songwriting, but that wasn't going to happen. As he sat drinking coffee, he noticed a new pupil in the canteen. The new pupil was quite tall and about 6'2" with a muscular physique. He had jet black hair and looked a little like Tom Cruise. James felt the stirring of competition and jealousy. Lucy and Anna were giving him gaga looks, so Tom decided he would introduce himself and act as a barrier. He walked over and said hi, and the Tom Cruise lookalike gave him a cool smile and said hi in return. It turned out his name really was Tom, and he had arrived or passed over after a swimming accident, when he had foolishly attempted to swim across the lake in an act of bravado to impress a girl. She wasn't impressed. Unfortunately, the currents were too strong and he never surfaced. The next thing he knew, he was enveloped by a warm light and he awoke at the school. He was guided by a teacher and taken to the headmaster's study, where things were explained to him as best as possible. Tom shook his hand firmly. "Who's the girls?" he said with a grin. "Oh, good friends of mine," James replied testily. "They're cute," said Tom. "They're cute," said Tom, and gave them a glance, then a longer look as they giggled together. James felt more jealousy and annoyance rising within him. "They're hot," he said, giving them a perfect smile. James tried to make conversation, but Tom was quite short with him and acted disinterested. Tom spoke about himself quite a lot and seemed self-obsessed. He had the body of a champion swimmer and he was definitely competition for James. Tom sauntered over to the girls confidently. "Hi," he said, extending a friendly hand. The girls fawned over him. James felt himself burning up with jealousy. Lucy and Anna were preening themselves as Tom grinned his film star grin, and he went through his life story as they listened intently and hung on every word. James found him boring. Lucy and Anna were twirling their hair and flirting like cheerleaders. James tried to start a conversation, but he was completely eclipsed by Tom's domineering personality. To make matters worse, he kissed goodbye to the girls before he sauntered off. James sat there feeling deflated. When Tom was out of sight, the girls chattered about him excitedly. "Oh, he's so nice," said Anna, "and cute too," replied Lucy. "Yeah, he's okay," said James, "a bit big-headed though." "Oh, don't be jealous," said Lucy and Anna as they giggled. "I'm not," said James sulkily, even though it was obvious he was. "He's just so self-obsessed and big-headed," James lamented. "Most boys are," said Anna, and they collapsed into more laughter. James was annoyed. "It's a bit much how you keep fawning over him," he said bitterly. "He's not James Bond." "Oh, James, we're just being friendly." "Too friendly," he said, and stormed out of the room. He lay on his bunk bed feeling miserable. The girls were still chatting together when Tom sauntered back, looking pleased with himself. "Where's James?" he said. "Oh, he stormed off," they said in unison. "Oh dear," said Tom, pretending to be worried. "Maybe we should apologize," said Lucy. "It's okay," said Anne. "He'll be okay. He's just not used to the competition." Tom asked the girls if they liked playing tennis. "Cool," they said, and rushed to get ready. Turned up in a white polo shirt and shorts. He looked super fit. They practiced rallying and soon built up a sweat. He was like a professional. He had powerful arms and a strong serve. It was hard for the girls to concentrate. Pretty soon everybody had built up a sweat and they stopped for lemonade. Tom drank it down greedily with much of it splashing onto his muscled shirt. He didn't care. He was a true Adonis.